nail this job search with your stellar resume, which I will talk about today. I am Hannah Kirk, and I also go by the pink-haired content strategist. It's a gimmick. I have pink hair, really, I promise, I swear. Okay, cool. And you all can see my screen, right? Nod. Yeah, okay, phew. Relief. All right, so I am a content strategist, which people don't know what that is, so I'll tell you. It's what I do is my goal in life, I guess, and in careers is to generally look at how people use words, use the right words for them, get them the right words to do the thing they want to do, to accomplish their goals. And I normally do this in a corporate setting. Usually it's always written words, not spoken words so much. So if I stumble over my words, it's because I'm a writer and not a speaker. Yeah, so looks like you all have some really cool pivoting you're doing. I love it. So I've been in tech for 15 years. I have been a technical writer, a product manager, and now I'm a content strategist. I have been part of lots of startups, 3 acquisitions I've been in now. So that means I've seen a lot of things in small companies and big companies. Some names you've heard of probably are Adobe or Ericsson. Ooh, somebody's trying to be a content strategist. Woo, woo. Big fan, obviously. And I've also worked at a lot of small startups that are probably things you've never heard of, which are kind of my favorite sometimes, but they're also very stressful. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about purpose of the resume. I personally, as a content strategist, like to, as I said, think about words and how they're used and when to use them and why you would use certain words to achieve your goals. So resume for me, like the number one thing you always want to think about or I always want to think about when I'm thinking about words is, what are the purpose of the words? What is the purpose of my thing that I'm writing? So that's what we're going to talk about first, then how and what you should write, the do's and don'ts, and some hacks that I'm pretty proud of. Okay, so first we're going to talk about why a resume. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with what a resume is and that you will need one and that you probably have to list some experience and jobs in your name and all that. But the real purpose of a resume in the hiring process is only to get you an interview. Full stop. It is not to get you the job. It is not to tell everybody all of your accomplishments. It's not to do anything except for get you the darn interview. So if you think of it like that, it's going to sort of change how you frame this. It's not meant to be like a table of contents of your life or anything like that. It's simply to get you an interview. So in order to tell you about what to do, let's talk about how exactly it's used. So typical process that I've seen in tech, and this is mostly in the startup world, because larger companies will do things in a more specific way. But in the startup world and in smaller companies where there aren't really specific ways, and I'm thinking like not Google, Facebook, Amazon, those kind of things, you're mostly what you have is you have a recruiter who is not the person who is hiring. They are the person who is working as like the HR representative or even as a contractor. They may not know anything at all about the actual role that they're hiring for. They might know some, and some of them at bigger companies will definitely know a lot, and they'll be really familiar with a lot of the tools and the processes and the coding languages and all that. They'll know a lot. But in general, the recruiters know enough to be dangerous, but not so much that they're, gonna be in the weeds. So maybe it used to be back in the day, whenever we'd have paper resumes, people would just flip through the resume, and if it was pretty or if your name stood out, like, if your jobs roles stood out, then that's how they would filter out a resume. Now it's all bots and keywords. So recruiters will use like many kinds of software. Greenhouse is one that comes to mind right now. I'm sure you might have even seen that, like in the URL when you're applying for jobs, greenhouse.io. It's a big one. But no matter what they use, they're usually going to ask you for your resume in a electronic format, which they will then filter through a bunch of bots or a bot, and they put in some keywords. Like, for example, if you're looking for a content strategy role, they were maybe looking for writing, for content, for strategy, for UX, for documentation, things that are hitting related to that. So the recruiters may put them in, or the hiring manager may suggest a few, or the bot might come with some populated things that you might want for like a project management role or that kind of thing. So that's number one. So the first thing you have to do is you have to get past the bots so that you can get to the recruiter. So once you've got past the bots, so you've accomplished, that's what the keywords are for. The bots have gotten you now the resume in front of the recruiter. Now the recruiter needs to know enough to know that you know what you're talking about so that they can pass it to the hiring manager. So then that's where explaining your experience and listing your experience becomes important. And the hiring manager will look at that and then dive a little bit deeper and say, okay, let's bring this person in for an interview. And then that will usually lead to your first maybe a 30-minute information interview with a recruiter. Well, it's basically a filtering tool to get you to step 2, which is the actual hiring manager and the real process of the job search and interviewing. So that means that you need to, number 1, have some keywords so you can get past those bots. And number 2, have pretty clear explanations of what you've done that's relevant, that is helpful for the recruiter and the hiring manager. Okay, so what to put on the resume. So some very simple things. Obviously, you're going to need your name. Very important. Don't leave that out. You're going to want your contact info. Also important. Don't leave that out. You'll want your portfolio or website link and your LinkedIn link at a minimum. If you don't have a website or a portfolio, put that LinkedIn link at the top. It does matter. It will make you stand out. And if possible, have your LinkedIn go into some more detail, maybe where your resume can't. That's a great place to list jobs that you've had that aren't super relevant. So let's say like you worked at an ice cream shop when you were 18, and that's not really relevant, but you wanted to highlight your customer service experience. So that's a good place to put that. You don't want to put that on your resume, but it's great on LinkedIn, unless you're, of course, going to work at an ice cream shop, in which case that's helpful on a resume. So you'll want your LinkedIn link there. Also, I would caveat that with make sure your LinkedIn link, if you are pivoting careers or if you are going from like a manager role to an individual contributor role, make sure that LinkedIn matches roughly kind of the target you're going for. Maybe change your titles to be a little more vague or something related. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. And then have a summary. So I believe that as part of the Lessons Up bootcamp, you might have come up with a 30-second pitch or a short summary. And this is a great place to put that, or some version of it. You also, instead of a summary, could highlight a few basic, really important skills. So I know one of you, like let's say you're pivoting from restaurant manager into support tech representative. You might have really relevant customer service experience. So you'd say, 10 years of experience as a restaurant manager, or 10 years of experience fielding customer service requests as part of a restaurant, or some version of that. And you could highlight some top skills there, proficient in Excel spreadsheets, or something, that you think might be up there. You also want relevant work experience and relevant volunteer experience. I recommend both of these because often for pivoting careers, you haven't had work experience in a specific area exactly, but volunteer experience is a great way to get some experience in that area, and it's okay to put that on the resume. And then you would also potentially want to put some tools that that are relevant, maybe some non-relevant jobs if you don't have a long work history, or if your work history is totally unrelated. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Professional associations, if it's important and helpful to you. So it's probably not helpful to put the ACLU on there, but it might be helpful to put the Society of Technical Communicators if you're looking for a technical writing position. So I'd say be thoughtful about this. It's not critical. And if you leave them off, it's not that big of a deal, but if it can help you, put it on there. I would also say with tools, it's important to be thoughtful. And for software positions, tech positions, you usually do want to put something up there about, like, especially if you're going for development or coding, you definitely need to put some coding languages that so maybe some Jira, Confluence, other tools that you can use in the tech industry that are relevant. Yeah, definitely make sure you do that. And then keywords, sprinkle those in. Don't have like a keyword section with a bunch of different words. That's not going to be any good, and that might actually rule you out. So put those in within your whole what was I saying? Resume, work experience, summary, all of those things. Make sure you hit those keywords. Okay. How should a resume look? So people have a lot of anxiety about the resume, the way it should look. I honestly really am a huge fan of not a fancy resume. And the reasons are here, basically. You want it to be simple and easy to scan, and chances are very high that you're going to need to change the format too. So if you did a really beautiful fancy thing in Word, and then the job application says for you to copy and paste a text version, the formatting is going to be out of whack. It's going to take more time. It's a pain in the butt. I personally am a huge proponent of make it easy on yourself and be efficient. And that's why I would personally choose not to use anything too fancy. And I certainly wouldn't spend too much time on the formatting. You want your name to be large. You want it to be at the top of every single page. You want your contact info at the top of at least page 1, and maybe also any subsequent pages. And it should be very easy to scan your resume and find out where you've worked, for how long, that's relevant, your relevant skills, your biggest accomplishments. It should be very quick and easy to find tools, skills, whatever it is that you're trying to highlight that is important for that job. It should be right there, and it should be on the first page. Now, a lot of people might tell you not to have a resume longer than 1 page. And I disagree with that, and here's why. Because you should have as much space on your resume as it takes you to clearly explain what it is that you've done that's relevant. That might not take 1 page, that might take 2 pages. You might have 3 pages if you've had a lot of really good relevant experience and you're looking for a senior position. So that's something that I'll leave to you, but definitely don't have a lot of anxiety about trying to fit it on page 1. If it only fits on 1 page, great. If it fits on 2 pages, also good. And I'll show you my resume in a second here. Actually, as an example, I'm about to show it to you now. Caveat, it's not the best resume in the world. I'm not trying to say y'all should have the exact same format, but it is a model that kind of explains sort of how I'm thinking about resumes that may hopefully help you. And then of course, Canva has some really good templates, but so if you do feel really strongly that it needs to look pretty, that's a great place to go. So, all right, we're gonna quickly look at my resume and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so for context, I spent, like I said in the beginning, the bulk of my career as a technical writer. That's a really related field to content strategy, but it is not exactly the same. And I could potentially pivot that without having put content strategist on anything. But I wanted to target the right jobs. I wanted to get the calls and I wanted to get the job I wanted. So as you can see, I have my name at the top. I have my phone number, my email, my LinkedIn, and then I have my portfolio. So if you're going for a writing job or a designing job and you know you need a portfolio, get yourself a website immediately. Find any way at all to put that on there. If for no other reason, then it's easy for you. It's just that efficiency thing. Like you can just plug that resume website or that website in, that portfolio in right away. Make it fast and easy on yourself. Then you can see I've highlighted here the job that or the role that I am. I am a content strategist, really, I swear, really hire me for that. So, putting it front and center, no doubt. Hannah Kirk, content strategist, awesome. That's a really good way to highlight what you want. So if you want to be, support representative, then like support representative. And this is what I was talking about with the summaries. So these are 3 different areas that work for content strategy, but that also work for technical writing. This is where, if you were like, again, going back to that restaurant manager, going to a support representative role, you might highlight like great customer service experience, 10 years customer service, whatever it is. I have pretty basic things on here. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of what I've written, but it's a way to highlight skills instead of your specific role. Then you can see here, I have the words professional highlights here, and that you might notice that's not work experience, work history. It could also say relevant experience or professional experience or something like that, especially if I didn't have experience specifically related to that area. And then I've got my title, of course, the company, the years, and I've got some bullet points. I actually would recommend only 3. This might be one of my resumes that I take things out of depending on the situation, which I also would recommend that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I had a role, not a title, of product manager at Adobe. So we'll talk about this in a minute, but it is okay to put a placeholder role on your resume. Because again, the resume's job is to get you an interview. Once you're in the interview, you can tell them, actually, I wasn't a product manager by title. I actually did the job for a few months because I was learning the role and they were teaching me and they were going to promote me into it, but that didn't work out. So you have explained it. You haven't lied. You are fudging a little, but enough to get you past the bots, which is important. And then documentation lead. I don't think I actually even had a title at this job. I was actually still working for my own consultant company. So if you all have ever done any consulting in any capacity in the past, this is a great place. I actually worked with a woman who was a professional resume person to get this taken care of. And she reminded me, hey, if you have your own business, you can have any title you want. I'm like, sweet, you're right, I could. So as a part of Hannah Kirk Consulting on my technical writing resume, guess what I am? A technical writer. And on my content strategy resume, I'm a content strategist. Or if I wanted to be really fancy, I could be a founder or something, I don't know. So these are all options. Then I have some other experience. So you can see that none of these actually say content strategist at all. And I don't spend much time talking about them. If they want to know what I did before, they'll ask. So it's okay to have an other experience area with titles that are not relevant for things that you did to show that, yeah, you've been in the workforce for a while, you know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, even if it's not exactly the thing that they were looking for in that role. And education is important. If you have anything you're working on at all in like building your career, so if you have certification like this, or if you're working on learning Python, for example, or Microsoft project or something, or certification on Scrum Master, if you want to put that on here, that's a good thing to put on. So certified Scrum Master, expected date. Even if you just started it yesterday, just put it on there, because hopefully by the time you get to the point where you have an interview, you'll be able to talk through that process. And if it turns out that you're not going to do it anyway, then you can just tell the person, oh, whoops, that was a mistake on my resume. Sorry, I messed up. Should have taken that off. And then just clarify, it's okay. People understand, you're human. So I wouldn't put anything on the resume unless it was relevant. Like, it's not super critical what you did here. So if you're like going for a doctor position and you have like med degree, I think that's important to put on there. But if it's not really related, it's okay not to put specifically like a bunch of stuff. In this case, I was trying to highlight that I knew research methods, because that can sometimes be important in UX content strategy. So I did put that on here specifically, and also similar to human-computer interaction. You can see I have my concentration here was the effects of media and television on society. Ain't nobody know what that is. So I put similar to human-computer interaction, where people would know what that is. It'll give me a little bit of an up level in the UX content strategy roles, because it looks like I have gotten some degree work in human-computer interaction. So also community leadership is a big one. So I have kids, they have a school, the school needed a fundraiser. So I put some fundraising activities that I did in case those were relevant. Might not be relevant for you. If it is, great. If it isn't, don't even bother putting it on there. And then I have some key skills here. So these are things that are probably more related to technical writing, but that might be helpful. If knowing specific tools and programming languages was critical to this role, I would actually bump this up a bit, probably maybe right before other experience, or even potentially at the top, depending on how important it was. So you're going to have to gauge kind of by what you see in job descriptions and what you see as what you would elevate to the top here. But this is also a great way to have not a thing that says keywords colon and then a bunch of keywords, but also hits some tools. So I know that people looking for technical writer roles or content strategy roles might be looking for me to know Markdown or GitHub or SVN. And I know this is small, so I'm not expecting everybody to read it, but that's some application there. All right, so we talked about what to write. Your summary is really a place to go there. Show your skills, do it, especially if you're pivoting. This is really, really important. For keywords, to find what keywords people are going to look for in your job or your role, whatever it is you're targeting. Find those job descriptions that have the jobs that you want, of the roles that you want, and look through them. And what are you seeing in common? Are you seeing Confluence everywhere, Scrum everywhere, Agile everywhere? What are these things? Know what they are, and make sure that you find a way to relate your experience to that. So for example, if you worked in a tech company and they did engineering processes that were agile and you didn't really do too much with it, but you knew about it, you could say familiar with agile methodology if that's important for your next role. You might not have much experience, but when you go for that interview, which is the whole goal of that resume. You can explain that you worked tangentially with the engineering department. You didn't work directly, but you did try to learn some about agile processes because it was very interesting to you, or something to that effect. So you might not know everything, but knowing some things and knowing that that's an important keyword is great. Another way to do it is visiting professional groups, professional organizations. LinkedIn has groups for just about everything you could ever imagine, top fields. So those are great places to find out what else is expected and what other processes or tools people are looking for, what problems they're having that you might be able to solve, et cetera. And for the work experience, so this is kind of my best advice for how to write your work experience. So tie it to numbers as much as possible, especially if you are going for anything numbers specific, so sales, marketing, that kind of thing. And really it's good for any role at all. As much as you can tie it to numbers, please do. And then you're going to want to highlight not just kind of your duties, but put your duties in context. So the PSR method and the STAR method, these are the two that I love. They're essentially the same thing. It's tell the reader what it is that you did. What was the problem or the situation? What was the solution or the task and the action that you took personally? And then what was the result? So maybe you have more soft things like, with a technical writing, I might say wrote manual for SNMP MIBs in 3 months, or like 100-page manual in 3 months with happy customer results or positive feedback from the engineering team. I don't have actual numbers, but I do have some information about how the result was. That's probably the trickiest part of the writing resumes, in my opinion, is trying to figure out how to talk about your own experience. But as much as possible, this method is helpful as far as like situation, task, action, result, problem, solution, result. If you think about things in that context, it's also a very helpful methodology when answering interview questions, just saying. And then I would say when you're using text elements, use them thoughtfully. Do use them, but use them thoughtfully. So I wouldn't put bold and italics all over everything. It's distracting. But you can see on my resume in particular, you can look at this without reading everything. You can kind of see the highlights, right? So you'd want to highlight the top skill that you have right in that bold right there, so that if somebody's looking through, be like Hannah Kirk, content strategist, collaborative builder, thought leader, great, technical complex, great, content strategist, product manager, great. Okay, moving on. So now they're like that. Sometimes that's all that they do. Sometimes that's all somebody does, a hiring manager or a recruiter. All right, so career changes. I think where most of us are in this category, if not all of us. One of the things that I did when I was pivoting was I had 3 different resumes. So I had experience as a technical writer. So I had a technical writing resume. I had experience sort of as a content strategist. So I had a content strategy resume. That's what I really wanted to do. And then I had a product management resume, which I also was interested in product management, but I was a little less qualified for that one. So I had 3 separate resumes, and I had a master version, or you could have a master version, I guess, that you can copy and paste out of, either way, because some of the stuff will overlap, of course, like your education and all that. And that way, when I tweaked it, I could tweak it on one page or a few pages. And I did have to remember to tweak it several times on each one if I was changing wording of like work experience or something. And I did it often based on the hits that I got. So apparently my resume was great for UX content strategy because I got a lot of calls, even though I'm not really qualified for it, or I wasn't really at the time. I got a lot of calls for that. And so it was exciting that my resume worked well enough to do that. And then I had to actually talk through it when I got to the interview part, which was a little scarier, but hey, got the results. So I would say trial and error is a really, think of it as trial and error. Your resume is going to evolve. It's going to change. Don't feel like you have to keep the first version ever. You might learn over time that, oh crap, like that thing that I put out there was actually not that helpful, or it was distracting, or you might realize that like there was a keyword that you used repeatedly that was awesome, or a resume that you used often that got lots of hits. So, just keep track of those things. And you're thinking of yourself really like a business at this point, right? You are the job, you are the hits. All right, so hiding irrelevant experience and highlighting relevant experience is a trick that is probably one of my favorite things for pivoting. So a really strong example of this would be if you were a manager or a director or a VP and you wanted to go to an individual contributor role. If that's the case, if you've ever had this experience, or even if you thought about this experience, it seems people see on their resume, VP of something, director of something, manager of something. Why would they, and they'll think to themselves, why would they want to go back to individual contributor after being a manager? And people will actively ask that and think, no, this guy's too experienced for this role. We don't want to call him up. He probably isn't interested because he's been a manager. This is where some creativity will happen in your titles. So I have this note here, titles matter on a resume and almost nowhere else. So nobody is going to call your former employer and say, did Hannah actually have the title of content strategist? They're probably at best going to ask, did Hannah work at your company? And they might ask, did Hannah work as a content strategist at your company? But hopefully by the time they've got to the reference check, you've gone through the interview process and you've explained clearly that your title wasn't content strategist. That was just the role that you had because your title was actually technical writer or whatever it is. So when it comes to like manager versus individual contributor and or pivoting, you're going to want to maybe keep your title close to what it was, but find a way to make it generic enough that it applies. So I think it was Nicole mentioned that you were switching from sales to project management. And I think that's tricky. I'm not sure what your titles were, but it might not be possible to change those titles on your resume to something that makes sense. For me, content strategy, technical writer is very similar, but you also won't rule yourself out by fudging here and there a little bit, because again, you have a chance to explain yourself later. All right, so some don'ts. And I see there's some questions coming in. I'm going to answer those in just a little bit, if that's okay. So some people will disagree with me on this, but I personally do not like objectives at all on resumes. If I see an objective on the resume, I kind of assume that you're either lazy or you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're, I don't know. Maybe that's my personal bias, and I think use them maybe very thoughtfully, but I prefer summaries of who you are, what your skills are, because those really just demonstrate that you're being thoughtful, that you're trying to present yourself well. Objective, I feel like, is easy to like plug in, like, I am looking for a full-time role in blah, blah, blah. And if you're not looking for, unless you're not looking for a full-time role in whatever it is that you're applying for, I wouldn't even bother. And then you could, of course, if you feel like you need to say that and explain, you could definitely put that in a cover letter. So that's no big deal. I also wouldn't recommend listing every job you've ever had. Certainly not through age 15, especially if you're 45. Just saying. You also shouldn't feel like your titles are going to make or break you. It's okay to put different titles out there. And I actually see a question on about LinkedIn. And I think that's an interesting gray area, and I want to dig into that specifically, actually, in a short time, because that could go either way depending on the situation. Don't talk about your responsibilities and tasks without talking about the results. Again, don't list your references on your resume. I don't know if I said that already, but don't do that. It's, for one, it looks bad because you're not really protecting the privacy of your references, and two, you want to know when they're calling your references, so don't give that out early. Make sure they have to ask you for it so you know you did well and they're getting to that point. You also don't want to list every Microsoft Office tool. If you can use Word and Excel and PowerPoint, that's a given at this point. You don't even need to bother. If you are like, now, that being said, if you are applying for a project management role and you are an Excel wizard and you can do amazing things with Excel, absolutely put that on there. But you don't need to list out that you like know how to check email and you know how to do, I mean, no, you should know how to do that by this point. Definitely don't focus on the format over content. If you have to choose, make the content awesome and the format, just let it suck. Doesn't matter. Not too much, but make it scannable, but don't spend too much time on it. And then don't also spend too much time on a cover letter. I personally don't really look at cover letters that often unless I have a question about the resume. So if you look at the resume, if your resume is like maybe, especially if you're going from manager to individual contributor, or you're pivoting and your titles are different, that would be a great place to say, I've had the title of account executive, but I'm really looking to move towards project management, which you can see on my resume, I have lots of experience in. So that will clarify. And I would also recommend you never, ever lie, because you need to be able to explain absolutely everything on your resume, period. So if your title was different, You'll need to explain that in an interview. Be prepared. Don't lie about like, I got 100,000 billion million bajillion dollars from my accounts, because you're gonna have to explain that. So, you know, it's one thing to get the interview, but you're definitely not gonna move anywhere if you lie. And then I would also say, don't put the year you graduated from grad school, high school, college at all on your resume or on LinkedIn, because ageism is definitely a thing, especially in tech. And I wish it weren't the case, but it definitely is the case. And if you can hide your years of experience by just listing jobs with no years until it becomes relevant, or even not even putting anything except for your relevant work experience starting at whatever year to make it look like you didn't graduate in 1992. However, there's one exception to this, which would be if you got a degree, let's say in hospitality, and you worked for 10 years as a restaurant manager, and then you got an MBA. That MBA is recent, and it's important to put that like as a more recent thing. And then it might, I still wouldn't put your actual bachelor's degree year on that, but it might be helpful to put your MBA year because it's new. So you could say expected 2023, May 2023, and that's that. Because that is at least, oh, okay, this person is entering a new field because they're getting a new degree. Okay, like that is sort of like a clarifying thing. People will put the pieces together. So some hacks. All right, so for big companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, research the company and their interview process. This applies a little less for startups, unless you happen to know somebody who works there, in which case, awesome, do that. Like talk to that person, ask them as many questions as you can. If you are applying at Google, Facebook, Amazon, and you get to the interview process, it is an extremely specific interview process. I have failed the Google interview 3 full times. That's right, 3 times I interviewed with Google and 3 times I failed. 2 different roles, maybe 3. Anyway, I kind of wear it as a badge of honor, really, because at this point, it's becoming a thing. So anyway, I did have to study hardcore. I also interviewed at Facebook once, also failed that one. I had to study hardcore for those. Definitely recommend you talk to somebody who has worked there, who does work there. If they're doing the job you want, even better. Definitely use those. Okay, so websites. I know we said I was going to talk about this. So if you're applying for a design or writing role or something where you're actually going to need a portfolio, you better have one, period. And best if you can have it on a website. If you have to do an email or whatever, fine, I get it. But if you can do it on a website, it's the best possible way. Now, if you're not in one of those roles where you need that, somebody in 2002 told me that you would get a leg up if you have even a website that just duplicates your resume. And I think they were right, because I still don't see this as often as I would think I should. It really just shows somebody that you've gone the extra mile. If you can put, other things on there, great. If you have a blog on there, great. I don't know if people really read that as much, but another really big advantage to this is you can use Google Analytics on your own website. So it could just be yourname.wordpress.com, and you could just have that up on your resume. But what would be really interesting is to find out, are people finding that from your LinkedIn? Are they finding it from a blog post you wrote on somebody else's blog? Where did they get that information? And then if that blog post you wrote on someone else's blog was about writing, or let's say actually restaurant management, then you can highlight professional in customer service as evidenced by this article or something like that, right? So then you can find out like, oh, okay, I'm getting hits on these things, and people are coming from my LinkedIn, or people are coming from my blog post about restaurant management. People are, so just having that information is huge. It might not lead to anything, but it also could lead to something. And for me personally, I think more information, the better. Then I would also say, have your resume ready to go with several formats, all of your versions that you've tweaked often. At any moment, you're getting on a job application, they want a PDF version, done. Getting on job application, they want a text version, copy paste, done. Looks pretty, good to go, or good enough, good to go. Makes your life easy, makes you able to apply for like 6 jobs a day instead of 3 jobs a day. And, cover letter, you could do something similar. Again, I struggle with cover letters a lot. I think they have some use, but they should be very short and very clear about why you want that specific job if you do. and probably won't be read, but might be if your resume is not clear. So I guess on a pivot, it's probably the most important, or important to explain a little bit in that cover letter, but not a lot, and certainly doesn't need to be several paragraphs. Okay, and then again, as I said before, tie as many accomplishments to numbers as possible, and then make yourself marketable. If you keep seeing in these groups or these jobs descriptions that you need to know Jira or Confluence or Asana or Miro or a Mural, download the free version, try it out, play with it, read a few articles on how it's used in the real world, try to understand the connections, because just even being able to talk about it, just having had some experience, being able to touch it, play with it, mess around with it, is going to give you some experience with it. Now you can put it on your resume. I have some Jira experience. I have some Confluence experience. I have some Asana experience because I downloaded the free version, but I haven't used it in the real world yet. I'm looking forward to doing so at your organization, whatever it is. So that way you get yourself in the mindset, in the place, do some research, all that. It's fabulous. Then also, if you need a portfolio and you don't have one, volunteering is an excellent way to do it, especially so for UX in general as a discipline, UX content design, UX design, volunteering for like your local city government, a local nonprofit, a website design, if you're doing that, these are really great ways to get experience and to build your portfolio. And you're not having to have a job. It's lightweight and you're doing good. So no real downside in my opinion. So these are some tips. Also, if you're ever going for a writing job, one of my personal favorites, especially if it's technical writing, would be to find open source software that doesn't have any documentation and then write your own documentation or rewrite some really bad documentation. So anyway, some ideas there. Okay, so now we're going to go to questions. I'm going to look in the chat and see if I can answer some of these. Okay. Do we put our website if we are consultants? Okay. Lena, did you want to say a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I guess because I went through an interview and which I think I was told it was illegal to ask me that. And so they asked if I was going to continue doing my consultancy. And so, I mean, a lot of people have side gigs or do, have a business or two or three. That's the Bay Area. I mean, in the Bay Area. So I would, and then she did it too. So I thought, well, that was interesting. I just wondered if they would be more work concerned that it wouldn't be focused at work, or is it considered a conflict of interest? I guess that's probably a better way to say it.
Okay, so call it consultancy in this case is a side gig.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do that now. And so I didn't know if because my website isn't like to show a portfolio like a creative site. It's actually the work that I do for like leadership development.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't put that on my resume. I don't use my website. It's on when the application asks for it, I do put it in there, like my LinkedIn, address, and then as well as the website, but I don't put it on my resume. And I try not to give it out unless I have to.
Okay, in that case, I'd say maybe it would be better to have a website just for your job search only, like a resume version or portfolio version that's separate.
Okay.
Perhaps like a link from your main website to the portfolio site or something like that could be okay. If you're finding that interferes with your job search, definitely don't put it on your resume.
I don't know if that was an isolated issue. I would think that, I guess the way I would see it is like, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, you have a creative side, you're able to develop and create, innovation, like working with people, human capital. That's how I see it. But I'm not sure if that was an isolated issue. I think if I understand that correctly, I think it's illegal for them to ask you that.
I don't know. Maybe if it's a conflict of interest, I'm not sure. That's really common that people are consulting as their job, side gig or not. So
Right. So I was like, come on, so because she divulged that too. She's like, well, I do it too. And I'm like, well, why would you ask me that? I guess because I wasn't sure if they would see it as like, well, how do I know you're not doing that while you're working for me or with me? So that was the other thing.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't put that on the resume, and I would also ask them why it matters. If they're concerned about a conflict of interest, you could just reassure them also, like, Oh, I may consider pursuing it as long as it doesn't interfere with this job in any way or whatever.
Oh yeah, I did that. I said, no, I'm very focused on priorities, but I was just like, oh my gosh. Okay. I wasn't sure because I'm trying to go towards tech, so I'm not really sure. Because I understand tech, they want innovation and creativity, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have never had consultancy hurt me. In tech, I've actually only had it help me. And that being said, I am in a field where that's very, very common. So I would think that, yeah, I don't think that should be a problem generally. Okay, if we change the title on the resume, will it look bad if it's different on LinkedIn? So great question. The short answer is it might not matter but if somebody's doing some real fact checking, they might have an issue. So what I would recommend is either make sure it's similar on LinkedIn or related and be able to talk through that in an interview, or if possible, change it on LinkedIn to match your resume temporarily. So I actually went on LinkedIn and changed my title to be content strategist instead of technical writer for some of my roles that were technical writers when I was doing a pivot. And really, the biggest risk there was that some of my old colleagues were going to see that I had content strategist on there, but they also knew that I was looking for a job. So it also isn't too far off. So I think it's okay. I'd say use your best judgment though. If you think that somebody that you know in your network might have a problem with it and they might tell someone else that you're looking, like I would not do that. And maybe, yeah, I don't know if it looks that bad though to have your resume and LinkedIn all that different, but I would say have them as close as possible just for keywords, period. Like it's just easier to remember to keep them together. Does that answer your question? Oh, I can't hear you for some reason. I'm not sure why. Although can see that you're not muted, or you are muted now. I still can't hear you. Weird. Do you want to type it in the chat? Okay. And then I'll move on to another one. Profile is the same as objective. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. When I said profile, it probably meant LinkedIn profile. If anyone wants to add on that, if that's yours.
Sorry, no, I meant in the resume.
Oh, can you remind me what I said?
Yeah, because you said don't put the kind of like the objective or something, put a summary. Yes. So what's the difference? I guess I'm confused between the objective, the profile, and I guess the summary. What's kind of like the difference?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I suppose that this does assume some nuance where you do know the difference between an objective and a summary, and really it might not be that big of a deal in general. The objective that I'm referring to is like this old school mentality from maybe 20 years ago or more, where they would say, my objective is to get a full-time job as a content strategist with a tech company. And that's really all an objective was. And you, for some reason, put that at the top of your resume. I'm not sure why. It seems essentially useless now. So don't do that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Okay, can I expand on how to promote a portfolio for not specifically a creative role? And what types of things should you show? So basic level, you could just copy paste your resume. An additional thing. So for product management, when I was doing more of a product management resume role, on my portfolio for product management, I sort of talked through one or two things I did as a product manager. And I think I maybe said like product manager at Adobe created this onboarding flow. And I talked a little bit about the problem, the solution. I can show some pictures. You can go into more detail than the resume, but yeah, I think that that depends. I don't even know if you actually really need a portfolio for any role that doesn't request one or require one. But, you could always talk through some things like that. Okay, so let's see here. making pivot, but exploring a few options and curious how to set up LinkedIn to be broad enough to translate across a few different types of roles. Okay. Just reading through this. Okay, looks like, okay, so that's Sabrina in reference to the changing on LinkedIn. So, okay, and what's your pivot specifically? Not sure yet. Okay, I would say probably this depends on your specific experience. Let's see. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Without knowing exactly what you're coming from and what you're going to, it's hard to say. And that if you're not really sure where you're going, I would say just put your actual title in there until you have more information. Okay, your product management, supply chain. Okay, I'd say yeah, keep your title probably what it is until you know more. And then once you do, I'd say so. For example, in content strategy, there's like 1,000 different ways you could be, like, to say it right. You could be information architect, content strategist, UX content strategist, UX designer, technical writer, content writer, marketing writer. Like this list goes on and on and on. So I bet if you, as you're looking through roles and job descriptions, you'll find some that sound like something you've done before that maybe you could put on there. Or you could, another thing you could do too is you could say, role where it says title, and then put the thing that you want, and then lay underneath in the description, say actual title, blah, role more like this, and then you could explain that a little bit. So that could also be a way. And just be creative. Get a lot of leeway when it comes to a resume, honestly. Again, it's only to get you the interview. Once you get the interview, it's all great.
I've got a few questions.
Sure.
So one of them is pretty simple or brief, like my question is brief, but like I've been doing some of those online courses through Demi just to sort of like be able to put stuff like that on my resume. So is that stuff that we should list like under the education part, even though it's not like formal education, or how would we, or would we just word it in like that we have like some kind of experience in it?
Okay, are we talking like
like for example, I ordered like Microsoft project through Demi. That way I could learn the software. So that way I can add it to my resume. So would we put that course like under there so that people know that, we are actually have some kind of experience, maybe not in the real world, so to speak, but like some kind of training on it?
So there'll be like a programming language, right?
What's that?
Is it a programming language or a tool?
Microsoft project. It's just like a system. Yeah.
I would put that with like either a tools section or key skills section where you say, like, so for example, this is essentially just a list here. Okay. This Java docs, Doxygen, Markdown, XML, XSL, etc. These are all either tools that are specific to writing or formats that are specific to writing that are very nuanced. This is a great place to put that. And then I also have varying levels of experience with these. So if you ask me about DITA, I can talk your ear off about DITA. But you ask me about Java docs, I can just give you like a short high level overview of what it is.
Okay. And then, so my other question, it's two questions, but it sort of relates. With the keywords and the matching, are they just looking for a one-to-one match, or is it like if you have that word multiple times, it's going to be more likely to pass through the bots? And then the second part of that is if your resume technically is 2 pages, that means you're going to have more words on there. So does that mean there's more of a likelihood that you're going to pass through the bots?
That I don't know. And I would really love to know the answer.
Yeah. Okay.
Take a note. Actually, I would like to learn that.
I wasn't sure like how if there's a way to find out if a company is using bots, because like I worked at a smaller company and we didn't use anything like that, but obviously like larger companies, I'm assuming, are like if you're applying for any kind of corporate job. But in your experience, from what you've seen, what's the likelihood of like a startup or something using some kind of software like that?
So I think this is really heavily dependent on the industry and the organization.
Okay.
I would say, so when I was hiring for technical writer roles, for example, we didn't even need a bot because we had like 3 resumes, right? It wasn't a lot. It wasn't a big pipeline or anything. Now, if it's a larger company and they get lots of resumes or a really popular field, that's where I actually don't know the answer to that question. I think one way to learn would be to try it. Generally, I avoid putting things on there too many times, maybe 2 or 3 at the most, like maybe once under a key skill and then once under a specific job or role or whatever that you had. I'm trying to look through here. I actually, let's see. At some point I have, maybe it's on my LinkedIn, so I wrote documentation with the Adobe Experience team or the AEM team. And it's a huge tool. And apparently people pay a lot of money to have consultants set it up. I didn't even know this until I started getting calls from LinkedIn recruiters who were like, it says you have AEM experience. Can you set up AEM? And I'm like, no, I don't know how to do that. So I would experiment. Like you'll kind of maybe start to see some patterns on there if you put it in more than once. I don't think it will hurt you if it's only once.
Okay.
But it will help you if it's more than once.
All right. That's good advice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Is there any other software other than JobScan to identify if is that supposed to be bots will pick up the language?
So yes. A lot of people, I guess, use JobScan where you take the software, you put in your resume, you put in the job description, and then it will give you a percentage. You want to get close as you can, 80%. And it picks up, I guess, the lexicon, that, the language and the correlation, I would guess. And so why I ask that is because after like so many times, you only can use that software for free, I think 8 times, and then after that, I think it's like $50 a month.
Okay, sorry, you're saying that software that looks at resumes only lets you do it for free a certain number of times?
Yeah, is there another software that you know of that you can use besides that?
No, is the short answer.
It's pretty impressive, especially if a lot of the tech is using the applicant tracking system.
Okay, I don't know about these. I'll have to look this up. JobScan.
And you put in, so on the left side, you put in your resume, I think it's the right side, you put in your the job description, and then it'll tell you what areas, like the percentage wise, like you're missing in this skill set. Like it breaks everything down percentage wise. It's really, really impressive. Yeah. So, but I wanted to share really quick what Nicole's, I think it was Nicole that asked that question. Did you Udemy project management? Microsoft has project management. So my friend works for LinkedIn for their executive team. And she told me to start, get registered and taking these classes on LinkedIn. And so I'm like, oh my God, I can't take another class, but I have to. And so, so she recommended like taking the classes that were relevant in that industry and to put that certification on LinkedIn because it rates you by competitive intelligence. And so I would probably not just list it as a skill set, but as a completion because they do pick that up. So,
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm like, can I take another class? I'm like, oh, I have to.
Wow, this is great stuff. I do know that there are targeted ways to get results on LinkedIn. I am definitely not as familiar with that as I am just traditional processes. That's cool.
Yeah, she did say when you do change your resume, your LinkedIn, it actually does help. So when you are changing, like even though we would think like it wouldn't, because I had the same question that Sabrina had. She goes, no, like when you change things or start referencing those articles. So like, mine's leadership development. So she's like, talk about in tech, if you want to go into customer success growth management, like how you help that process and then, write some articles like around or a paragraph and then tailor it to that lexicon so that it helps your LinkedIn. And then it'll go to the top. So that was the other way it can create traction.
That's great. That's great advice. Thank you. What other questions can I answer for y'all? Well, if you have more, I've got my contact info here. hannahkirk@gmail.com. Feel free to email me. And I'm also on Twitter, and there's my portfolio website. You can take a peek at it and see if it's any good. Feedback welcome. And my LinkedIn and all that. Thank you so much, everyone, for your fantastic participation, your excellent questions. Been a great audience. Mwah, mwah. Hope to see you sometime. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jen.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye.